Hey everybody, welcome back to Political Science 101 at Simmons College. The semester's almost over. This is going to be the first of three short videos that you should watch before you complete the final exam. We've covered a lot of material in this class, not as much as I wanted to, but to be very honest with you all, um, it's hard when we're not doing this in person. I'm a professor who thrives off of the conversational aspect of teaching a class. So I thank you all for completing the assignments, for watching these videos. Don't forget to comment below that you watched it. You get 50% of your grade in this class is participation. So I make it really hard to fail because you start out with 50 points if you just comment that you watched the videos, or if you contact me in some other way to indicate to me that you're following along the class materials. This will be the first of three short videos, as I said, and they'll be about the Constitution and about civil rights. This one, going to talk about some stuff that I hope you got in grade school, either middle school or high school, but probably not in exactly the same way that I will present it, and that's the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the United States Constitution. I encourage you to read those. They're very brief, they're not very long, and they're in the appendix of your textbook, and also you can just Google United States Constitution, and those amendments will probably, you'll be able to find them online for free, and you can look at them that way on your phone or computer if you want to. So, I'm not going to do all 10. I'm going to do the ones that are relevant to us today, that are relevant to your life and my life. These are pieces of the Constitution that provide legal guarantees of certain rights. Now, does the government always enforce those appropriately? Meaning, does the government always make sure that we have those rights? No, it's not. The amendments and the law in general is not enforced equally in this country. It should be, and we'll talk about that in the next video. That's a different amendment. And I will say the United States federal and state governments are better at protecting the rights of our people than they have been at sometimes in the past, but only in certain ways, in certain circumstances. And we'll talk about that on these videos. So, not doing all 10 of those amendments that make up the Bill of Rights. That's the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. I'm going to talk about amendments 1, 4, 5, 6, and 8. 1, 4, 5, 6, and 8. These are important. Hopefully you've heard of them before. First Amendment says a few things, but arguably the most important part of the First Amendment is freedom of speech. Why does that matter? Because in countries where the freedom of speech is not articulated in the law, preferably in a constitution type document, not articulated in the law and not enforced, meaning the government doesn't enforce its own rules, you can't always criticize the government. There are quite a few countries in the world today where you cannot just get on social media and say things that are critical of the government. Now, if you do that in this country, if I got on Facebook right now, or if I got on Instagram or something, and I said something critical of the United States government, I don't like something that our government is doing, individual people may call me out, may say that I'm wrong and stupid or whatever. They can criticize me, and the government can criticize me. But the whole point of the First Amendment is that the government cannot punish me for speaking out against it, or for speaking out against anyone or anything. That's what freedom of speech is all about. It's about the ability to say what you want about whatever, whoever, including the government and anyone else. Now, all of these amendments, all of these rights guaranteed in the Bill of Rights within the Constitution, there's something implied in there. It doesn't say it in the text, but there's an implication that you have a certain right up to a point. freedom of speech, First Amendment, means that I could criticize any of you. I could say something nasty about you publicly. But what if what I'm saying is not true? What if what I'm saying harms you? It gets you in trouble at work, or causes you to lose your job, or gets you expelled from Simmons College because of something that I said about you publicly. First Amendment says I can say that, but you could sue me. You could sue me. Let's say I say something bad about you publicly, your boss sees it, it costs you your job. But let's say what I said was a lie, it's not true. You sue me for defamation. And how much money do you sue me for? Well, at least as much money as you're going to not make while you're unemployed. So, I have a right to free speech up to a point. Let's move along. Fourth Amendment. This is a big one. The Fourth Amendment protects people in the United States against unreasonable search and seizure. That's kind of what it sounds like. It means that the government can't just come in and search your house for drugs. Even if they think you have drugs, they can't just come in there and search. They're going to have probable cause, a legal reason, preferably a warrant. They should always have a warrant. There are some circumstances in which they don't have to, but a kind of high-level overview of the Fourth Amendment is that the government needs to have probable cause, a legal reason to search your house, your person. If they want to frisk someone on the streets, they need to have a reason. Law enforcement's supposed to have a reason. What happens if they frisk you on the street, or if they bust down the door of your house and they didn't have a good reason? Well, if they bust down the door of your house and they found some illegal products in there and they arrest you, if they didn't have probable cause to do that, any lawyer, not even a good lawyer, any lawyer, even a not so good lawyer, should be able to get those charges against you dropped. Should be able to get you out of trouble. I said should. I didn't say it always happens that way. I said should. Should be able to get you out of trouble. What if, let me think. What if, I mentioned earlier a scenario for a civil suit, a lawsuit. Let's say you sue me for defamation, and the evidence, some evidence in that lawsuit, is contained on my laptop, on my computer. Can the judge in that lawsuit just send police to go take my computer? No. You've got to have a legal process for the government to take anything that belongs to me. Or you. Again, that's the way it's supposed to work. If a police officer's walking down the street and they see your house and they say, hey, I know a guy who lived here a long time ago, don't know if he lives here or not, but he used to perpetrate domestic violence. So I'm going to bust down the door of this house and see if anything's going on in there. They can't just do that. Well, they can, but it's against the law. It's against the law. What if a police officer's walking down the street and they hear sounds that indicate violence clearly from outside, from the sidewalk? Yeah, then they can go in the house. Then they can go in the house. They don't have to go with the judge and get a warrant if they want to stop, in order to stop something that's happening right now. Unfortunately, I hear far fewer stories like that than I do about when law enforcement executes a search without probable cause. It seems to happen a little bit too much, doesn't it? That's the Fourth Amendment. Fifth Amendment says a few different things, but the one thing I want you to take away and remember is the right against self-incrimination. You have a right. You have a right against the government forcing you to incriminate yourself. That's a big deal too. That's a big deal. If I have committed a crime, and I know I did it, but I also know the government has to prove it if they want to send me to prison. I have information in my head that could incriminate me. Government cannot force me to testify, because once I get on a witness stand and I testify under oath, if I lie, that's a totally separate crime. It's a pretty serious crime. In the circumstance I just described, I could go to prison just for that lie. So the reason that the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination matters, the reason it's important, is that there's nothing worse the government can do to someone in one action, not over time. There's all kinds of terrible things government can do to people over time. But in one action, nothing worse they can do than sentence you to prison or death in a murder case. That's the biggest deprivation of liberties and of rights that the government can perpetrate on its citizens. So the state should have a difficult time, a hard time proving that I committed a crime. Now, that assumes you go to trial in the first place. That assumes they don't threaten me and scare me so much with so much prison time that I strike a plea bargain. But the government should have a high bar to jump over if they want to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that I have committed a crime and should be punished. Sixth Amendment. Speaking of the rights of the accused, the Sixth Amendment guarantees a right to a speedy trial, a public trial, a trial by a jury of your one's peers. I'm actually going to read this one. You can read it yourself. I know you're smart people, but this is important. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and district wherein the crime shall have been committed, which district shall have been previously ascertained by a law, and to be informed of this nature, meaning that the accused shall be informed of the nature and cause of the accusation, to be confronted with the witnesses against them, to have compulsory process for obtaining witnesses in his favor, and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. What does that mean? Again, it means the government should have to work pretty hard, either federal or state government, whoever's putting you on trial, they should have to work pretty hard to prove you did a crime. Even if it's pretty obvious you did it, they still shouldn't. It shouldn't be easy, because they're not talking about fining you $50. If they charge you with trafficking narcotics, they're talking about sending you to prison for a long time, or really violent crimes like sexual assault, battery, things like that. The government should have to work hard to prove that someone is guilty, and the person accused of that kind of crime, any crime, but particularly ones that can send you to prison for a long time, they should. Meaning the government should make sure that the accused has the ability to have legal representation, to confront the witnesses. In other words, let their lawyer cross-examine the witnesses in a way that benefits the defendant, not the government. I'm guessing y'all know this does not always work out like it's written in the Constitution. In reality, some trials are more fair than others. Some juries are more fair than others. I doubt that I was the only one who was surprised when the jury in Minnesota returned a guilty verdict for the police officer who murdered George Floyd. It was the right verdict, but I was not expecting it, because I've read a lot of American history. I've lived through a little bit of history, but I've read a lot of it. I'm glad that the jury saw the facts of the case in front of them and applied the law appropriately, but historically speaking, that's not how I thought it was going to go down. I'm glad it did, but I was surprised. Some trials are more fair than others. Is that right? No, of course that's not right. Is it fair? Well, no, it's kind of the whole point of what I'm saying right now. It's not fair. But it is history. It is reality. We've got a long way to go in this country if we're going to really enforce the Sixth Amendment, which is one of the most important pieces of American law. It's on the books. Okay, let's go enforce it. We as a people, as a nation, should be enforcing it. I said to y'all a couple of lectures back, I said, when people talk about make America great again, this country's got a pretty sketchy past to go around calling itself great. there are some great things about this country. We have done some great things in this country. I mean, um, taking the Nazis to task and liberating Europe, that was good. A lot of really cool advances in research and so forth that have helped everyone. That have helped not everyone, but helped a lot of people all over the world have come from this country. Um, I can keep going. I know a lot of great people that come from this country, but talk about it being great. Like, it'll be a lot greater when we can do things like enforce the Sixth Amendment. As I told y'all before, the pieces in the Constitution are there to make this a much better place to live for all of us. And I've got a better life than most people. I do. But for everyone I know in this country can tell you a way that their lives could be better if the government would follow its own rules. Follow the rules, like the one about an impartial jury. Speedy and public trial. Speedy, what does that mean? It means you can't just languish around waiting for your trial forever with charges hanging over your head. Do people do that? Oh yeah, they do it all the time. It's not right, but it happens. So yeah, we've got to enforce these things if we want this to be a great place to live. Eighth Amendment. That's the last one I'll talk about today. Well, in this video, I should say. Last one I'll talk about in this video. That's the Eighth Amendment. Eighth Amendment is really about the appropriateness of crime and punishment. Meaning, okay, you've been convicted of a crime or you pled guilty to a crime. Now what? It's one of my favorite amendments because, again, it's not really enforced. We can, if there's time in the next two videos, I will discuss the appropriateness of some crimes, whether or not something should or shouldn't be illegal, whether or not it's right that y'all live in Kentucky, so if you grow a marijuana plant in your backyard, that's a major crime, whereas I live in Arizona where I don't grow any marijuana, but if I wanted to, I could, in my yard, because it's legal. But it's not legal where most of you all live in Kentucky. We'll talk about that in the next video if there's time. But Eighth Amendment says that the government shall not impose cruel or unusual punishments. Cruel and unusual, what does that mean? Well, the courts have spent over 200 years trying to figure that out. As I told y'all before, the judicial branch interprets the law. They interpret the Constitution every day and been doing it for, again, over 2 centuries. And as to what constitutes cruel and unusual, it seems like America's vision of that changes over time. My personal opinion, and it's not just my opinion, but it is, and it's popular enough. I feel comfortable sharing it here. Is that any death penalty is a cruel? Is it unusual? Depends on where you live. It's less usual now than it used to be in this country. But get beyond death penalty, it's just a prison sentence. Someone who, let me think about this. A typical scenario of what some would consider, what I would consider, a cruel, not unusual, but a cruel punishment is someone who's in prison for a long time, and all their original charges that got them there were drug offenses. So you have someone who their first offense, they're like 19, 20 years old, and first offense, they are arrested for, I forget what Kentucky calls it, but some states in federal law they call it like possession with intent to distribute, or in other words, trafficking. The government says you have so many drugs in your possession that's not personal use. Like you wouldn't have 10 pounds of marijuana or a kilo of cocaine for yourself. That is for you to sell to people. Obviously, we're going to basically charging you as a drug dealer. That's your first offense. Okay, you get a little time in jail and then a bunch of probation, but you violate probation with that time on the shelf. In other words, the deferred sentencing, you're on probation, they catch you with a bunch of drugs again. Now you're really in trouble. You have to serve out that sentence. They might tack some more onto it depending on how many drugs you had on you, or depending on what mood the arresting officer or probation officer or judge happens to be in that day. They'll take advantage of whatever part of the law they want to give you a bad sentence, and so now you're in prison for a while. Oh, and I forgot that second time you also had a handgun. So you're a felon in possession of a handgun. You get out of prison and same old crime again. Maybe that person went back to selling drugs because they couldn't get a decent job with their felony record. But whatever the reason, they're selling contraband again, and so back to prison, long time. Now you're a persistent felony offender. That's a heightened sentence, and now you're in prison like half of your life. That is not unusual in this country. It happens all the time. Is it cruel? Yeah, I'd say so. And there's plenty of case law to support that. Plenty of judicial interpretations to support the idea that it's not unusual, but it is cruel. And it's a clear violation of the 8th Amendment to the Constitution. Even though I feel that way, state governments in this country don't seem to, for the most part, don't seem to agree with me, do they? I'm guessing we all know at least one person who's lived out that scenario I just described. Constitution says you cannot impose cruel punishment. That's pretty cruel, given the nature of the crime, but we need to start enforcing these rules and holding our own government accountable to actually doing the things the Constitution says they're going to do. And in case I haven't mentioned it yet, well, I have mentioned it, but in case I haven't mentioned it in several weeks, don't forget that these rules apply to the states, not just the federal government. Yes, this is the U.S. Constitution, but no state can pass a law that directly violates any part of the Constitution, or federal law for that matter, but any part of the Constitution. Therefore, these amendments, 1, 4, 5, 6, 8, they all apply to state governments too. So the whole thing about search and seizure, that's not just about federal law enforcement. That's LMPD, that's Jefferson County Sheriff, that's Kentucky State Police. That's all those law enforcement entities. This Sixth Amendment right to a fair trial, that's federal court, but also state court. Whether it's a speeding ticket, a DUI, assault, or murder, federal court, Kentucky courts, that amendment still applies. So does the 8th Amendment, whether it's the Commonwealth of Kentucky that's punishing someone or the federal government. Or Jefferson, or Louisville Metro, that 8th Amendment still applies. All right, that is a summary of highlights of the Bill of Rights. Next video, I'll talk about the Reconstruction Amendments, 13, 14, 15. These amendments are a big deal. They're a really big deal. They govern, the 14th Amendment governs so much of everyday life in this country. 13th Amendment, 15th Amendment, those are pretty big ones too, historically, but they're still relevant. Thank you all for watching the video. Don't forget to comment below that you watched it. And I will be talking to y'all soon.